it's 5%, isn't it, on a referendum of all the votes cast for governor in the previous election, and I think it's 7% for an initiative, and it's 10% for the Constitution. Some people say maybe it should be 20%. Some people say, like Massachusetts, the voters should have to ratify an amendment in 2 successive elections. They can have 1 vote, that's not enough. The next election has got to be on the ballot again. There are various different ways that that can be done, and that may be something you want to, consider and talk about.
Thanks. Okay. Well, then at this time, would you like to call your students up, and do you want to join them?
Yeah, I'll tell you, they'd probably be more honored if you would call them up now. One of them is Andrew Levitt, who is a student from Swartz Creek, and the other is Dennis George Lennox, the second, who is from Topanabee in Sheboygan County. But call them in whichever order you want, and I'll sit down and...
Well, before you leave, just clarify how they did pass the class, right?
They did not. They're both outstanding students. And not only that, they're masochists. They took 2 courses from me, not just 1.
Why don't we have them both come up at the same time? And we'll have you fill out cards before you leave. Do you have a testimony? Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay. Which one would you like to go first?
I'll go first, Madam Chair.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you for having me here today. It's a pleasure to appear before you. Before I get to the specifics of my appearance, I'd like to give you a brief overview of my involvement in this process, a little of what Mr. Ballinger touched on, but a little of some other matters as well. As Professor Ballinger said, both Andy and myself are former students in his class, and this past spring we had the opportunity to work on a really eye-opening experience being part of a mock legislature and going through the entire process that you guys go through every day and examining the Constitution from page 1 through its entirety. And we looked at everything, both in the Constitution and from what other states have in their Constitution. We were divided into a mock legislature for Senate and the House, and we had Republican and Democratic caucuses, and I was fortunate enough to serve in the Senate as the mock majority leader, and Andy was more or less the mock speaker as leader of the Democrats in the House. Among the issues that we examined was the governance of higher education institutions, term limits, consolidation of local units of government, the election of judges, removing archaic and invalid provisions of the '63 Constitution, restrictions on ballot question groups, and numerous other issues. In the end, politics became a factor, and we only garnered enough support for 2 major issues, the ones that you're hearing most about today, this cleanup amendment and also term limits. We strongly felt it was time to expand the constitutional limit on years of service in the legislature. There's been a lot of proposals about that of late. We decided in the end, after numerous debates and proposals, that the best method was 20 years with no restriction on the chamber of service, or the combination. You could do 10 years in the House or 12 years in the House and the remainder in the Senate, or entirely in 1 chamber. Additionally, our biggest proposal that I guess you guys are here to hear about today, and seems to be some support on the committee, is this cleanup provision. A lot of people on face value want to say it doesn't seem too important, but in reality it does cover about 5 to 7 provisions of the state constitution, provisions that are either archaic or illegal because of numerous court rulings. Among them, the voting age in the Constitution says it's 21, but we all know it's 18 today. There's verbiage regarding the defunct county boards of supervisors, limitations on who can vote in municipal elections on tax issues, and a couple other issues that don't make any sense to have it in our state constitution when they're no longer valid. Part of the reason why we had the Constitutional Convention in '61 and '62 was to do away with this rather clunky 1908 constitutions, and that was watered down with amendments. And we're kind of seeing that today. And one of the questions that Professor Ballinger asked us at the time was, does our state need a Constitutional Convention? We weren't able to reach a 2/3 vote on that. The Republicans felt it was time for a Constitutional Convention for the simple fact that, as they did in 1961, that once you start looking at a couple issues, it's worth examining everything. And I think we can all agree that there's a few issues, whether you're Democrats or Republicans in the state constitution, that need to be looked at. But I would especially like to encourage the committee here today to really look at this proposal that we've recommended, eliminating these archaic and invalid provisions of the '63 Constitution. We think this would go a long way towards making Michigan and the citizens a better place. And I guess if Andy has some prepared remarks he'd like to give, or if you'd like to ask me questions, I'm more than welcome to entertain them at this point.
Well, thank you. I think we'll go on to Andy, and then maybe we'll have some questions after that.
Well, Dennis touched on a lot of what I was going to say. Well, first I'd like to thank you for having us here today. I'd also like to thank Bill for making this part of our class, and I'd also like to thank our classmates for working so hard to make this such a great group, come up with some great proposals. We started off, like you said, Bill asked us, should we have a con-con? The House did not support a con-con, and the Senate Democrats didn't support a con-con. Mostly because, well, we've seen in the past, well, since term limits, there's been no compromise in the House or in any part of the legislature. So we decided that if they can't compromise there, why would we think they can compromise in a constitutional convention? There are some things that need to be changed, but they're not so pertinent where we would want to spend the money, which we estimated around $10 million to have a con-con. That was one thing that we thought was unneeded, and these things aren't having adverse effects on our state where it needs to. So we chose not to have a con-con, but one of the driving forces behind the old idea to have a con-con was this archaic language. Dennis and Professor Ballinger did some research and came up with a good idea that we could just put on the ballot as we have here today. And as a class, we came together to support it. On the Democratic side of things, we also we agreed on the term limits. We wanted to 20 years, either house, any chamber, all together. And going off of Senator Jacobs was saying earlier, the Democrats also recommended that we increase the number of signatures to get a constitutional amendment, just a constitutional amendment, from 10% of votes cast on a gubernatorial election to 10% of all registered voters. And that would make us about the top 10 to 15% of states as in difficulty to get a constitutional amendment on there. And we looked at these top 10 to 15% of these states, and they're not having these out-of-state people coming in to do these constitutional amendments and making tons of money off the petitioners and the consulting fees and all these things that are happening. So that was one of the big things for our chamber was the 10%, but it could be through a 2/3 vote.
Well, let me, okay. Today, help me to understand just the process. How did you, first of all, how many people in your class, and how did you decide between who were the Democrats and who were the Republicans? The structure and kind of the process, and then what the timeline was, because I remember when I went to Central, I think all of them were Democrats in my class. There were just a few, closet Republicans. Yeah. So
They were
if you
lined
could,
up out the door to have this guy. So.
okay, they had to register before they came in.
Oh yeah.
Well, if you could just maybe help us to understand the structure and how you went about with the process a little more.
Well, I guess probably the first or second week, Bill asked us, to do this, and then he told us the situation. And the class was about, I'd say, 50-50. We had to take two moderate Republicans and put them in the House with the Democrats, but they were more people that were on the fence. They didn't really care. So other than that, and then Bill tried to do it in portion, right, to what the House is now, the same amount of votes, and same proportion as the Senate. So
The Democrats